Hello everyone. Emily here for the Art of Senior Fitness Program Design Part 4. We still have a couple minutes to go here, but as this is the 4th time we've been doing this, I like to join a little bit early and make sure that we are all going, all being able to see what's going on here. Perfect. So live on LinkedIn. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're at. Let's see if we're live yet on Facebook. Okay, we are. Wonderful. Okay, so that's probably the easiest beginning setup I've had to date. So now we have 3 minutes just to sit and wait until we officially begin. If you're just joining because you got an alert to your phone that Stronger You Senior Fitness or Emily Johnson was live, what you've stumbled upon today is the Art of Senior Fitness Program Design. It's a multi-part series that I've been doing usually Thursdays or Fridays around 12 or 12:30 Eastern time. And we're talking about all things senior fitness, older adult fitness. And if you're wondering if this is the right webinar conversation for me to join, if you work with seniors in any capacity or you want to, definitely you should stick around for the next 30 minutes, grab your lunch, grab a coffee. We're going to start in 2.5 minutes, get into the conversation. If you work directly with seniors in a recreation or fitness capacity, you're going to get some really tangible tools that you can use. If you oversee a group of individuals who directly work with older adults, then again, you're going to get some really good tools to go back to your person and see if they've maybe considered some of the things that I'm going to talk about today. And I'm doing something a little different. Usually I have my little picture here in the corner and then I've got the slides happening to the side. But today, since we're talking about upper body strengthening, I'm gonna kind of go back and forth, and at some point you will see me full screen. And I've got a 5-second delay on my side, so I'll leave it here just to see if that is going to translate well. And if you've just joined and you're still waiting, please let me know if you can hear me twice or anything weird like that. We've had kind of a bunch of crazy things happen over the multi-part series. And if you haven't joined me or haven't watched the last series, that's okay. They build on each other in a sense, but they're not prerequisites to understand the content that we're going to talk about today. If you do want to go back and watch the other series, go to the Stronger You Senior Fitness LinkedIn or Facebook page. So we are live today on both platforms. So everything is looking good. We've got a minute to go and we're going to jump right into it. Again, if you've just joined us, just to recap, this is the Art of Senior Fitness Program Design. Today we're going to talk about upper body strengthening. It's a lot to cover in 30 minutes. So we're just going to do an intro. You're not going to be an expert after this. And then next week, we're going to talk about lower body strengthening. And it is 10:30 right on the dot, so welcome if you've joined. Grab your lunch, grab your coffee, and we're gonna get to it. All right, welcome everyone. Happy Friday. Let's do this. Slides, good. Okay, so if you did join us for part 1, we talked about Canada's physical activity guidelines for older adults. And part of those guidelines are the 2 days per week of muscle and bone strengthening activities for the major muscle groups. So today we're going to focus on the major muscle groups of the upper body. And just a bit of the why. Why do you want to ensure you're offering a strength-based class at your organization? Well, really key for improving mobility and helping your individuals you serve maintain their independence. If you've been with us for any of the past parts, you know that one of my biggest pet peeves is how much gentle exercise and stretching that we do with older adults. A lot of the stock photos you'll see, you've got that side bend happening, and you'll see the images that I always choose. I like to choose older adults who are doing strength, doing cardio, doing real things that are going to help them maintain their independence. So if you don't currently have a strength-based class, today is going to be the day where we sort of start to jump into those things. Even more so, it's important because it helps maintain and prevent injury. So if you have the strength to keep yourself upright, to navigate with your environment, you're less likely to do things like fall. And if you do have a fall, the older adult is going to be much more likely to be able to recover from that fall because they've taken part in strength training program. And then also the age-related decline. So about age 30, we see that gradual decrease, about 1% a year, in muscular strength, power, endurance, all of that. And then when we get to age 60, that's where we see that decline really start to accelerate. But the good news is that through physical activity, through a strength-based class, you can help mitigate that loss, and actually you can see increases. Your muscles really don't know how old you are. All a bicep knows is I have muscle fibers, and when I am acted upon, I am going to react and build in order to meet the demands that are placed on me. So that bicep doesn't know if you're 60 or if you're 30. It's just going to react to the environment. So we're going to start talking about, I know there's a lot of muscles here. Everyone's like, whoa, this is not for me, I'm leaving. We're only going to focus on a few here. There's over 600 muscles in the body. We're not going to have time in our 30 minutes today to go over all of them, but we will go over your deltoids. So those are your shoulder muscles. We're going to go over your pectoralis majors. So that's the chest muscles. We'll talk about the biceps brachii and the rectus abdominis. We may run out of time. If not, I will do rectus abdominis next week. And trapezius, which I don't know why my trapezius didn't lighten up there. And then for the muscles in the back of the body, we're gonna look at, there we go, trapezius. And we're going to look at the triceps brachii. Okay, so these are sort of the major muscles of the upper body. And when you see Canada's physical activity guidelines and it says 2 days per week of muscle and bone strengthening for all the major muscle groups, these are the major muscle groups of the upper body that that guideline is speaking to. Okay. All right, yes, more scary diagrams on the slide here, but don't be afraid. I'm going to break it down to you in really simple layman's terms, but I want you to understand this because this is really important for how we activate a muscle. If we don't understand this, it's really hard to effectively activate muscles. So we have a muscle, let's say the bicep. Your bicep, it's a large muscle. Within that bicep, we have muscle fibers. So what you can see right here, and yeah, you can see my mouse perfect, that is a muscle fiber at the top there. And muscle fibers are made up of all these little dots, these myofibrils. Okay, so inside the larger bicep, we have muscle fibers, we have myofibrils, and even within the myofibril, we have even smaller units called myofilaments. So that's what we're showing down here in this second diagram. And you have two types of myofilaments. You have actin and you have myosin. So if anyone's having a flashback now to grade 12 biology, that's great. If you're not quite catching on, that's okay. We're gonna go through this. It's not gonna be super complicated, I promise. But the reason this is really important is the actin and myosin and something called the sliding filament theory. So what happens is when a muscle is told to contract, when a nerve impulse is sent to your muscle and says, we need you to lift this grocery bag, we need you to squeeze that bicep, the myosin attaches onto the actin and pulls it in. And as a result, that muscle is going to shorten. Okay? So knowing where our muscles are and knowing that when they engage, they shorten, helps us to know how to engage that muscle. Okay, so typically when a muscle shortens, that's called a concentric contraction. So myosin is going to grab onto actin, is going to pull it in, that muscle is going to bulge, and you're going to see it get shorter. There's also something called an eccentric contraction. That's when myosin binds onto actin, but we see a stretch. So an example of that might be where instead of doing a bicep curl like this, we're reaching out. If you just do that even at your desk or wherever you're at, you can kind of feel a stretch in the muscle. We're still working the bicep, but we're feeling a stretch. And if you can imagine, I'm holding a handheld weight, which I do have here for later purposes. And then we have an isometric contraction. And this is a contraction where we don't have any movement. Most commonly to associate with this is like a plank. A plank, you're just holding the movement, you're not moving, but the muscles are contracting, but they're contracting just to hold the body in place instead of having anything shorten or lengthen or anything like that. Okay? So if you're a little bit confused with this slide, the one thing to take away is when we contract, myosin binds onto actin, and typically for most of our exercise we're going to talk about today, the muscle is going to shorten. Okay? Let's continue on here. Just checking for questions really quickly before I move on. Nope, I think we're good. Okay. Now, we're going to go through all the major muscle groups that I spoke about. Okay, so the first one is the deltoids, and we're going to talk about 3 of them. You have a front delt, a side delt, and a back delt. So it's actually 3 muscles that make up your shoulder muscle, and the anatomical terms for those muscles are your anterior deltoid in the front, your lateral deltoid on the side, and your posterior deltoid on the back. So throughout today's webinar, we're going to talk as much as possible in layman's terms versus the technical term, but for those of you who like the technical term, it's going to be there on the slide as well. Okay. Now, the origin and insertion of the muscle is really important because that's, again, going to tell us how we need to effectively activate that muscle. So for your deltoids, they originate at your collarbone. So a lot of us will be able to find our collarbones here. They're that sort of protruding bone, the only horizontal long bone in your body. And if you sort of feel across your clavicle, you sort of get to an end point. So it kind of goes like this and straight out. And if you keep going past that, there's a little dip there. And then you're going to feel your shoulder blade or your scapula. Okay, and if you keep going back, if you're flexible, you'll kind of go down the spine of that scapula. So if you look in the diagram there, the deltoids will originate on the clavicle and at the top of the scapula, the shoulder blades. Okay, and why the origin and insertion is important, because the origin is like the anchor. That's the part that typically will stay still. Then we have the insertion of the muscle. The insertion is the part that moves, okay? So for the deltoids, the insertion is your upper arm, okay? It's the bony process of your humerus is where the deltoid, actually kind of feel it as well, get in there and dig around in your shoulder, of where the deltoid muscle inserts. And as we just learned, we have the sliding filament theory where myosin is going to bind onto actin and pull it in. So if I want to engage my shoulder, and I'm going to switch my scene for this, if I want to engage my shoulder, then I'm going to do something like this, a front raise. Okay, so what's happening is we've got the origin, we've got the insertion of the front deltoid, and when I lift a weight like this, it contracts to bring my arm forward. Okay, does that make sense? So when we want to engage the front delt, we have to do something meaningful that goes along the lines of the origin and insertion. Now, lateral, the side deltoid. For this one, same thing. We can do a movement like a lateral arm raise. That's where that term comes from, and back down. So as you can see, if you can imagine the side deltoid, if we wanted to shorten and contract, if this muscle gets shorter, it's going to pull my arm up and then it's going to bring it back down. Okay? So the deltoid is always responsible for movements that move the upper arm. Okay? Move the arm all around. So we went over, so this is a great front move for the front deltoid. We can do a side raise for the side deltoid, and then I don't have a great chair for this, but you would do a back raise to engage the posterior or the back deltoid. Okay, so I'm going to be scooting back and forth today to show you a few movements as we go. Okay, so that was the deltoids. Next, we're going to go over the pectoralis major. So this is the muscles of the chest, typically what we would call this. And again, the muscle is going to originate on the clavicle, okay, the clavicles, and it's going to go down to your sternum. So the sternum is maybe the place where, if you've ever taken a CPR course, we're thinking about pressing, maybe not up that high, it's a little high for CPR, but the top of the sternum is where the chest muscles then originate. So all the way down clavicle, chest, and then out again to the upper arm bones, the humerus. So we think about like a fan, the chest muscle looks a bit like a fan. If that fan then contracts, we're going to get an inward movement here, okay? And when we contract through the chest, typically we'll do this through moves like push-ups, where we're pushing and we're pressing. So things like wall push-ups are a great option to do with your older adults. Push-ups on the floor, if you can even get to it, or a chair push-up. Just make sure the chair is against a wall so it's stable. Doing it from your knees, that's okay. And so working through that progression, starting with the wall, move to a chair, and then maybe trying it on the floor from the knees. And a little pop up here, but I think we're okay. Okay. Another move you can do from a seated position with the band is you can put the band behind the back. You want to grab the band in really close to the armpits, and you're going to push those arms forward and back. So that's another way that you can activate the chest muscle. So again, I'm going to give you just a couple moves per muscle group just to sort of get you started. So push-ups, great option, and you've got that chest press with the band. And all right, next we have the trapezius. So we're going to flip to the back side of the body, chest on the front, trapezius on the back. Trapezius is this beautiful, big, diamond-shaped muscle. It gets its name for its trapezoidal shape. So trapezius, trapezoid. And it's a big muscle, so it has a lot of organs. So it originates at the base of your head, so your occipital bone. And it goes all the way down your spine, all the way to T12. So you have 12 thoracic vertebrae in your spine, and it goes all the way down to T12. So just about to mid-back before we get into the lumbar spine, which is your lower back. Okay. And then it inserts on the clavicle or the collarbone and the shoulder blades. Okay, so if we think about if you've ever seen someone with really bony shoulder blades, they've got that bony spiny process. That is where this muscle is inserting to. And again, if you just look at the look at the trapezius, and when you squeeze, if it shortens, can you guess what's going to happen? It's going to squeeze your shoulder blades together. And this is really, really important for older adults, because what do we start to see as we age? We start to see this really hunched, stooped posture. And this is not just for older adults, this is for individuals of any age. I'm really focused on this for myself because if you work at a desk or just have bad posture, like me most of the time, your chest muscles tend to be really tight and it pulls you inward. And your back muscles tend to be weak. So for anyone, but older adults especially, want to focus on shoulders down and back, pulling, squeezing the trapezius. Also the rhomboids are underneath the trapezius, are helping to squeeze the shoulders back. And a great move, I'm actually put my camera down a little bit here. Oh, just see just my desk. Okay, I want you to kind of see my legs a bit here. I'm going to put the band under my foot, and I'm going to lean forward. I'm going to reach my hands down to about my knee, and I'm going to squeeze back and relax. And we just want to relax the head and the neck and really focus on this trapezoidal muscle in our back, squeezing it and relax. Also movements with a weight. I just have one weight for today, but leaning over and doing something like a fly. We're getting a bit of that posterior deltoid there, and also the trapezius, squeezing back the muscles. So trapezius, responsible for squeezing the shoulder blades together. Then we have the biceps brachii, or the biceps. Most people are know this muscle is quite common. And biceps, bi meaning two, and you can see in the diagram, the biceps has a short head and a long head. So that's where the word bicep comes from, is from the split, the two heads. And the biceps originates where the scapula meets the humerus. So if you kind of feel that space I was talking about between your clavicle and your scapula, right about there, is kind of an area where there's a bit of a dip between the two. That is where the long and the short head of the biceps originate. And then it crosses a joint and it is inserted in the radius, or one of the two bones of the forearm. And anytime we have a muscle that crosses a joint, that's where we're going to get movement in the joints. It's from that crossover. So most of us are familiar with a bicep curl, right? So one of the few ways to activate this muscle is by squeezing that weight up and squeezing that muscle. Or doing something like a hammer curl, where you turn the weight to the side. So you're just getting a bit of a twist, a little more of the brachioradialis. So we've got lots of muscles that we're not going to talk about today, but getting many of those involved as well. As I said in the beginning, there's also eccentric contractions. So that could be instead of just doing a bicep curl, doing a bicep reach. And if you're doing this movement with me, you kind of think, okay, what else am I using here? We've got that front deltoid as well as the bicep working to extend the arm and then bring it back. So we got a bunch of muscles moving there. I'm going to check in with our platforms here. We're rolling along. Wonderful. Okay. And I just realized I have not been switching my camera around so you can see me a little bit bigger. So I will try to remember to start doing that. So we went to biceps. Now we're going to go to the bottom of our arm for the triceps brachii. And just how we said the biceps have two heads, the triceps has three. So if you look at the image here, you can sort of see 1, 2, and 3. So those are the three heads of the tricep. And the tricep is on the back of your arm. Okay, so underneath, biceps on the front, triceps on the back. Your tricep, one of the areas of origin is going to be your shoulder blade, that spiny process of the shoulder blade that I said you can kind of see on some people. And the other is going to be the humerus, so just that long bone in our upper arm. And then the insertion of the tricep is the olecranon process, or the elbow. Excuse me. So that's the fancy name for the elbow, is the olecranon process. And once again, whenever we have a muscle that crosses a joint, when that muscle contracts, something's going to happen. And with the triceps, it's going to straighten our arm. Okay? So the bicep bends the arm, and the triceps help to straighten the arm. And I'll change my scene here for you so you can see me a little bit better. So a few moves for the triceps. If you only have a chair, a great thing you can do for the triceps is you can just do like a dip movement or a press out of the chair. So when I squeeze up, I squeeze the elbows and I'm working the triceps. And you want to work in both directions to make that tricep really work. If you don't have arms with chairs, sorry, I'm going to pop up here. Then you can use a band. Again, one end of the band in towards your chest, the other band out in front, and you're going to press out and in. So kind of move it to the side, out. You can see the tricep squeezing, showing you the guns, and back in. Okay, so squeezing and bringing it back in. Another thing you can do for the triceps, I find this one gets a bit tricky for some individuals to do, but it's just a extension back. The goal with this, though, is to make sure the shoulder stays stabilized. So that posterior deltoid is going to keep the arm in this position, and then the only thing that's going to move is the elbow. out and back in. So squeezing the triceps and in. So instead, sometimes you'll see things like this. Okay, again, we're getting our posterior deltoid more for that, but if you just focus on only extending from the elbow and back in, then we're going to get that triceps. Okay, wonderful. And perfect. Now, we do have time for rectus abdominis. Awesome. So rectus abdominis, you've got a whole bunch of abdominal muscles, your obliques, but we're going to mainly focus on the rectus abdominis. Really good for things like getting out of bed, getting out of a chair, sitting up, and most people will refer to this as the abs or the six pack, right? You can kind of see the outline of the sort of 8 or the 6 there. Now, the abdominals originate at the pubic bone, and they insert just at the bottom of the sternum to the ribs. And again, if we think about muscles, when they shorten, when they contract, if those are the 2 points, what's going to happen? You're going to see down here, you're going to see a crunch forward. So it always makes me laugh a little bit when people say, oh, we're going to do abdominals, and you see everyone, and they're sucking in their abdominals versus getting a crunch. So what I like to say to coach any kind of abdominal move is I like to say ribs to hips. Okay. And just to recap, when we have the origin, which is like our anchor, the origin typically doesn't move. The insertion moves towards the origin when we see that contraction happen. So if I'm standing up nice and tall, I have my abdominals running up and down. If I'm going to contract my abdominals, my ribs are going to move towards my hips because that's where the muscle runs. Okay. Now to challenge the abdominals, one move that I really like, I'll kind of turn sideways for this, is having the older adults you work with sit in a chair and they can cross their arms. They want to contract right away. So hips to ribs, contract, lock it in. I would say lock it in like a seatbelt. Cross their arms and they can lean back towards the chair. You can see my chin is tucked and then I'm coming back up. Okay, and to have a little bit more support with that, you just move further back in the chair. You could touch the chair if you needed to, and then coming back up. But again, thinking, what is the movement that I want to happen? And this is very functional. When you get out of bed in the morning, when you get out of a chair, engaging those abdominals. And this is one that I could probably talk about all day because it's such an important muscle that we often overlook with older adults. And it really is a functional one. So doing a lot of training with your group on the hips to ribs, on contracting through that core. Okay. So now just to sort of bring it all together, I gave you maybe 1 or 2 moves for each of the different upper body muscles. And as I said, these are sort of the major muscle groups. Do a bit of a check, and you can go back and watch this video on the Strong You Senior Fitness LinkedIn or Facebook pages, but do a check. Are you doing at least 1 move to engage all of these major muscles? Okay, and are you engaging them in an effective way? So what that means is, have you thought about where's the origin of this muscle, where's the insertion, and that's going to tell you how you contract it, what movements you need to do in order to work that muscle. We got to do it in very specific ways. Now, in terms of how many you want to do, we talked about this in some past sessions, but you want to do about 8 to 12 repetitions is a good place to be. And the last 3 repetitions should be difficult. If they're not difficult, then we need to look at our weight. So I know so many older adults, their first instinct is to grab the 1 or the 2 pound weight. I hear all the time, oh, my group doesn't use the 3 pounds or more. I seriously, if I could, would just like poof, one wish from a genie would be to remove all the 1 and 2 pound weights because they're not functional. Our purses, our dinner plates, our grandchildren, they all weigh more than 1 or 2 pounds. So if the older adults you work with want to have functional strength to do the things that matter to them, then they need to pick a weight that is going to help them achieve that goal. Okay, so maybe push your class to say, hey, we just did 10 of those bicep curls. Were you feeling the challenge for the last 3? They should almost feel like they can't do it. And if you joined me last week, I talked about outcome-based programming, and I talked about the biceps curl test as part of the senior fitness test. And as part of that test, women need to use 5 pounds and males you need to use 8. And as I said last week, anytime it was someone's first time doing a senior fitness test and I handed them a 5-pound weight, they thought, oh, there's no way I can lift that. And once I gently placed it in their hand and said, well, just give it a try, they always surprised themselves and they were able to do 10 or 12 or more in a 30-second span. So a lot of times it's mind over matter. You as that trusted advisor need to help your group to meet their needs. Now, the next thing, and this is not always possible depending on your group fitness setting, maybe you're doing a full body workout, maybe you're trying to get cardio in there as well, but if possible, try to do 1 to 3 sets of each of the moves as well. So if you're going to do 10 bicep curls, and then you're going to do 10 forward, let's say front raises, and then let's say you're going to do the lateral raise, take a break, let's go back to the bicep curls for another, let's say 10 of those movements. Okay. What else did I want to say to you? Yeah, I think that's it. We just have a couple minutes left. So if you have any questions or any best practices that you're currently doing with your strengthening workouts, please feel free to leave them in the comments and we can have a discussion. Not everyone's going to be joining us right now to watch the video, so we can sort of keep the conversation going. And if you didn't get a chance, please visit the Stronger You Senior Fitness LinkedIn and Facebook pages, whatever platform you're joining us on today, and you can watch all the other parts. Next week, we will be doing the lower body. So we'll focus on the muscles of the lower body and a few exercises that you can use to engage that with your individuals. Okay. If you have any questions about your senior fitness programming, please feel free to reach out to me, Emily at StrongerYouSeniorFitness.com. I'd love to hear what you're doing or give you any help that I can to really help you give the best program for the seniors that you serve. And if you were joining us today and you're more in a management capacity, you're not directly working with seniors, you're not teaching senior fitness classes, I would encourage you, go back to the person you work with or sit in on a class. Are you seeing these major muscle groups being activated? And if not, how do we coach that individual to ensure that they are really running a quality, safe, and effective program? So thank you so much for joining me today, everyone. That is our 30 minutes together, and I will see you next week for lower body strengthening. Thanks so much, everyone.